Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this school, in particular to Serge, Robert, whom I met, we were saying 25 years ago, maybe, in Mexico City at UNAM. And also I feel I am in a very good company here with Paul Thagard and Lorenzo Magnani, because we've known each other for a very long time. The bibliography that I sent to the school included 3 papers of mine, and the presentation will be about 2 of them. The first one is published in this book. The title is The Place of Logic in Creative Reasoning. Creative reason. So you can tell that I just changed a little bit the title for this talk. And it's perhaps relevant to say that it's published in a collection by Springer, the Sapere, whose main editor is Lorenzo, and Paul and myself are part of the editorial board. So what I will do today, well, that's Charles Peirce. That's my favorite philosopher. He's a 19th century gentleman. And what I will do is basically to address, not answer, but to address the question, is abduction a logic of synthetic reasoning? And then in order to deal with this question, I will present to you Peirce and abduction. What did Peirce said about abduction? Well, part of it, because he said many other things that I will not tell. Then I will just mention what logical models of abduction look like. And in the end, I can see that nowadays we are at least trying, in my case, to connect to the artificial intelligence discussion. And in my case, I will deal with this connection or this question through the creativity or the creative potential of abduction. So that's why I am the third part of the talk. In fact, the second part, because the second item is very short, I will talk about intelligence versus creativity in AI. So let's start with what Peirce said, among other things, about Kant. In fact, part of his project was to organize, or rather reframe, Immanuel Kant's categories. I will read this because I sent the slides a week ago, and then, well, there are some things that I wanted to ask. Well, first of all, for those of you who don't know Kant, distinction between synthetic and analytical reasoning, what I would like to say is, well, in Kantian philosophy, synthetic reasoning refers to the cognitive process of synthesizing, that is, combining raw sensory data with our mental concepts to generate entirely new informative knowledge. So it's, so to speak, generation of new knowledge, rather than just breaking things down to their definitions, and that is, which is analytic. Synthesis actively builds our understanding of the world. So what does Peirce says here? According to Kant, the central question of philosophy is how are synthetic as judgments a priori possible? But antecedently to this comes the question, how synthetic judgments in general are, and still more generally, how synthetic reasoning is possible at all? Let me put it in my own words. How is it that creative reasoning is possible? When the answer to the general problem has been obtained, the particular one will be comparatively simple. This is the log of one. And well, Peirce has said many things about abduction, to the point that some of them, to some Peirce scholars, actually look contradictory. On the one hand, he would say abduction is a process of forming an explanatory hypothesis. It is the only logical operation which introduces new ideas. So that's why, in a way, the abduction from a logical point of view, referring to Peirce, is the logic of synthetic reasoning. But he also said the abductive suggestion comes to us like a flash. So that looks more like a kind of intuitive operation. Let me, first of all, present to you Peirce's formulation. The formulation is in lateral language. We are at the end of the 19th century. Frege had not formalized logic yet. So the original formulation is as follows. Of course, there is a logical interpretation of it, but it says, the surprising fact C is observed, but if A were true, C would be a matter of course. Hence, there is a reason to suspect that A is true. This is his formulation. Before that, he presented a syllogistic form that Serge, in his introduction, talked about it when he made also the connection of abduction to the notion of apagoge in Aristotle. The way I have interpreted this is a surprising fact. What does that mean? First of all, there are several ways of being surprising. I have distinguished that in something. A fact can be surprising because it's novel, it's totally new, or because it's anomalous. It's something that we were not expecting. Moreover, something that is not presented often, especially in the computer science disciplines, is that for Peirce, that was a formulation, but he asked for several other criteria, two of them. First of all, the hypothesis is that A should be testable and also should be economic. I will not go into what economic means. That's not what we think about economics, but Peirce had a theory of the economics of research. But if somebody is interested, we can go into that in the questions. This is one way that can be formalized. We have to add something to see, because it's not just a fact. We can have to say or represent the fact actually surprising. Something is going on there. And also, please notice that the conclusion, it's actually a suspicion. That's why it's a hypothesis. If we didn't have this question mark, then we would be committing a logical fallacy. In other words, the conclusion is not deductive. It's what Peirce would say, this is ampliative reasoning, meaning the conclusion expands or says something more than the premises. But that also means that it's fallible. We may not conclude A. It's just a hypothesis. And also, we can interpret, but if A were true, C would be a matter of course, like this. But this is a meta symbol, meaning it doesn't have to be a material implication. It may be a process or even a mechanism. So we can say that C must be a cause, and as I already said, that is a mechanism. Now, what did Peirce said about the creative, so to speak, part of abduction? He says, it is true that the different elements of the hypothesis were in our minds before, but it is the idea of putting together what we had never before dreamed of putting together, which flashes the new suggestion before our contemplation. In the paper, actually, I go more in depth. Why? Because usually the interpretation is that the abduction, what we infer abductively, is the hypothesis. But then the question is, where is the creative part? And perhaps Percy is suggesting us that the creative part is actually connecting these two things. We are connecting things that we didn't connect before. As I already said, some Persian scholars actually thought that there was something strange or even contradictory. Frankfurt calls it Persia's dilemma, meaning, well, what is abduction? Is it logical? Is it intuitive? What are we talking about? For Anderson, he says, well, abduction is an act of intuition and one of inference. Let's not forget that in the time of Peirce, there was no really difference between logic and epistemology. This is a sort of a methodological distinction that we've done afterwards. And for him, all operations were logical. But also his notion of logic is not classical logic. It goes beyond what we could say that is logic even nowadays. And for Ayim and Pavula, one of the editors actually of this book, says, well, it's actually that abduction has two aspects. One is intuitive and the other one is rational. And what Frankfurt says, just let me remind you the form. I think nowadays it's easier to see it in this way. If we have C and we have A implies C, then possibly, maybe A. And Frankfurt, one of the people who most criticized it, he says, well, clearly, if the new idea or hypothesis must appear in one of the premises of the abduction, it cannot be the case that it originates the conclusion of such an inference. It must have been invented before the conclusion was drawn. So basically, A is not something totally new. A must have been there before. In other words, in order to infer A, it must have been somewhere. So there's a surprising fact, but then I also draw on, oh, maybe if A were true, C would be a matter of course. Let's put a very simple example. Surprising fact, well, this is a dummy example, but this is one that is used. We observe that the floor at the street, like now, it's wet. But it's not raining. Fortunately, it didn't rain yesterday, and that's a surprising fact because normally the floor is wet when it rains. So there must be another hypothesis. Maybe someone is watering the garden, or the sprinklers were on, and so on. So in fact, several A's are inferred as a hypothesis. What does Anderson say? In this sense, the A in A implies C is logically prior to the A in the conclusion. This is interesting because logical inferences, at least in classical logic, we don't talk about timing that. In fact, we can reverse the order. But here, the order, it's important. However, it is also clear that the two A's are one and the same. Therefore, in temporal terms, they may not be simultaneously arrived at. It does not follow that A must have been invented before the conclusion was drawn. So, well, these are just several quotes. In the paper, I analyzed this in more depth. Now, let me jump into the 21st century, and this is one book actually edited by Magnani and his colleague Bertolotti. This is a handbook of model-based science, and I had the opportunity to edit the logical part of it. But what I want to say here is that the section is called the logic of hypothetical reasoning, abduction, and models. And also there's like a second version of another handbook in 2022, in which the same authors of this section made an update of their papers. And I think we got feeling. But the point that I want to make really is as follows. Even if they use a lot of logics, a very interesting one, here they use adaptive logics, which is something invented in Belgium. And this other paper, they use dynamic epistemic logic that is linked to the Dutch tradition. Also, some other authors use dialogic logic connected to argumentation. And even the Brazilians, where there is a very good tradition in paraconsistent logics, they also use paraconsistent logics. So this is really wonderful and apparently very sophisticated, and it is, I can assure you it is. But the basic idea is the same. The basic idea is you have a Persus formulation, and then you have a system in which, given some surprising fact and a database or a scientific theory in which you can link up lots of, let's put it this way, implications, then you draw the hypothesis. Indeed, for those who are in computer science, you might have heard of a logic programming language, which is called, language which is called Prolog, which means basically programming in logic. Well, there's a version that is abductive logic programming. The thing there, however, and this is important for my following point, is that that hypothesis is not produced from nowhere. You need to have a set, how they call it, of abducibles. Otherwise, you couldn't abduce anything. So what's the situation? Well, let's go back to Persus scholars, and one of them says, well, on Persus' view, it is possible for the hypothesis and its abductive application to occur together. Anderson, I remind you, is the guy who thinks that actually abduction has both sides, intuition and logic, or the rational part. Therefore, abductions may be insightful and original and still have logical form. However, the question remains, what does it mean that it is original, that it is new? What does that really mean? Well, let me now draw a quote from Herbert Simon, who was also mentioned before. Which I like, before I read it, to say that the kind of creativity, so to speak, the type is called, and I think this is coined by Paul Thegger himself, is combinatorial abduction. Sorry, combinatorial creativity. What does that mean? We create new things. They are new. But what we are creating are new connections. So in this respect, in the Persus formulation, the original thing is that we connect, given C, we connect A to C. The floor is wet. Well, normally when the sprinklers are on, then the floor, well, the garden would be better, gets wet. So that's a good reason. But we already knew that rule. But drawing on that rule is what is new, the new connection, which may fall under the combinatorial interpretation. If we think on philosophy of science, we also make the distinction. I mean, one thing is to abduce, let me use this inference, initial conditions. What are the initial conditions that I need to build up my explanation? But another thing is to build new concepts, totally new concepts. When the concept of quark in physics was created, the quark, as far as I know, is not made from previous concepts. But there are many scientific discoveries that are actually made by combining things. And this I learned in one of Paul's books. I think it's Mind and the Brain, in which you have a whole chapter in which you review lots of scientific discoveries and you categorize them. So in other words, what I want to say is that logical abduction, this is what I'm talking about today. Yes, it is creative, but it cannot create things that are totally new. Fact, because it's a logical environment. We already have our language, in logic, you have the alphabet, you have ways of forming your well-formed formulas. So you can make many new combinations, but you cannot say, oh, I have a new symbol and this is what I get. That's the basic idea. And now let me read out loud Simon's quote. For Simon, he was one of the researchers in contemporary philosophy of science, I would say one of the first, who talked about the normativity of scientific discovery. And in this respect, he said the following: new representations, like new problems, do not spring from the brow of Zeus, but emerge by gradual and very slow stages. Most scientific activity goes on within the framework of established paradigms. Even in revolutionary science, which creates those paradigms, the problems and representations are rooted in the past. They are not created out of the whole cloth. So there is nothing new under the sun. Let me put it as simple as that. Now I will go to the next section. How much time I have? So I know how to.
25 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So let me now move to here. We all know that when Alan Turing presented his paper of 1950, he started his paper in the journal Mind. It was called Intelligent Machinery. And his question was, can machines think? Or he starts with that question. But two clarifications. First of all, his question was not descriptive. What he wanted to achieve is whether machines can simulate intelligent behavior. So this is one distinction that I know is very well known, but I always like to make it very clear. And then, in my opinion, unfortunately, the name of the field was artificial intelligence. I say unfortunately because this has made, in my opinion, a lot of confusion. So the original program, in the sense of Lakatos as a research program, was to simulate intelligent behavior. However, in this arena or in this context, where do we put here creativity? That is precisely my question. And actually, my proposal is that not so much the name, but the approach, the new approach today in what's now it's plural, what they call by artificial intelligence. It's the AIs. What they look for is for new things, creativity. They want to generate new, let me put it this way, elements. I don't want to commit to ideas or even theories. So now I remind you of this paper by Turing. I already said this question, and then the project was the quest for artificial intelligence. I am paraphrasing, because it was a bit longer of this original paper, what Alan Turing meant by this. First of all, for those of you who don't know, he used a mathematical model, which is an automata. It's a structure that has nodes and then connections between these nodes. You have an initial node, and then you have transitions to go to other nodes, depending on the instructions of the program. But the question put it systematically was as follows. Can a finite state digital machine, such as an automata, through a series of instructions, perhaps long but finite, give coherent answers to questions asked by a human and deceive him, making him think that his interlocutor is a human and not a machine? And in this paper, he presented what he called a game, and later was called, I will show you, the Turing test. So what is this? There's a person here. Sorry, this is in Spanish, but I can translate to you. So this guy is phrasing the questions. On the other hand, the original one has two elements or two artifacts. One of them is the digital one, a computer, and another one is a human. But the idea is the human phrases the question, he receives or she receives an answer, and then the human has to realize or whether it was made by a computer or by a human. If he thinks that it's a human and it's a computer, then it's said that the program has passed the Turing test. So this was a long time ago, as I said, 1950, maybe not even or the students, your grandparents were born at that time, I don't know. But what does this resembles you for today? How does ChatGPT works, or at least works as an interface? We also are we're still here. We ask questions to the program. We already know, the funny thing here is that we already know that it's an artificial artifact or an artificial agent, but it behaves like a human. Sometimes we ascribe to this program even emotions. ChatGPT is so polite, and it allows me to ask the same question over and over again, so on. But in any case, as anybody know, everyone knows, ChatGPT is a large language model created to maintain, well, among other things, to maintain conversation with its users. Paul already told us what were the kind of questions that he phrased. Actually, I like very much that your question was a meta question, because you asked ChatGPT, what are the appropriate questions for some goal? It is an AI trained in a data set, a very, very big data set, and is able to generate text similar to the one a human would produce to respond to those questions posed. So we are, in my opinion, at least in this, from this example, we are still playing the Turing test. And among other things, what Turing told us, I have my presentation here as well, so in case I didn't see something like now, let me just put, yeah. Oh, it's just the reference. So Turing said something about creativity. One of the things he said was as follows, talking about learning. As many of you know, he is or is considered also I wouldn't say the father of AI, even the grandfather, I would say the grandfather of machine learning, in my opinion, is more correct to talk about machine learning. Artificial intelligence is what has to do with anything that we can program or design to learn. And that's why in the learning, new elements can arise. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. The possibility of letting the machine alter its own instruction provides the mechanism for this. And this is a quote by a Portuguese researcher, a nice paper called Turing is Among Us. But here again, he's citing Turing. Now let me move for some of you already know that there can be, well, it's never like a single event to found a discipline. However, there are highlights. And one of the highlights was a summer at Dartmouth College in the United States, in which John McCarthy, the founder of Lisp, this programming language, among many other things, they had a meeting to write up a research program. And they thought, you know, over the summer, we will hire some students and postdocs, and we will build a research program to invent or perform artificial intelligence. On the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. For the present purpose, the artificial intelligence problem is taken to be that of making a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if a human were so behaving. This is what John McCarthy. Well, not so much, but anyway. And this is recorded in a paper by one of his pupils, by Niels Nielsen. Anyway, I want to show you this because nowadays, or of course, I would like to see your reaction, how we take these kind of conjectures. I don't want to comment on them, but look at the following one. Other two pioneers were Herbert Simon, I mentioned him, and Newell. And also notice, this is what's called today interdisciplinary. This is a very interdisciplinary project. John McCarthy was a mathematician. Simon was a cognitive psychologist, although he won the Nobel Prize in economy. His career or his profession was as a cognitive psychologist, and Newell was a computer scientist. In 1958, they said, in 10 years' time, more or less when I was born, most psychological theories will have the form of a computer program. I don't know how many psychologists are here in the audience. If so, I would like to know, what do you think about this? In particular, Herbert Simon was interested in scientific discovery. In fact, he, with his colleagues, his more computer-oriented colleagues, he has a very nice book about simulations of scientific discoveries. And so he said, well, is there a logic of discovery? This is the title of one of his wonderful papers. And then his methodology, so to speak, was to say, well, let's simulate some scientific discoveries. Let's see how they work. But even now, even then, even with those, let me put it this way, pretensions, with these conjectures, what they will do, at least John McCarthy, and I'm sure Herbert Simon as well, we're aware that this was not so straightforward to achieve. John McCarthy said something as follows. Artificial intelligence research has so far been only moderately successful. Its rate of solid progress is perhaps greater than most social sciences and less than many physical sciences. You see how his view of the social sciences. This is perhaps to be expected, considering the difficulty of the problem. However, and then I think the next quote is even more insightful. But unfortunately, we understand human mental processes only slightly better than a fish understands swimming. So I'm approaching the end, but I would like to stop here. So when we speak in terms of Alan Turing, I think he was, well, wonderful and very precise. I repeat it to dictate what we now call, or what then was called, artificial intelligence. I'm first talking about the so-called GoFi, Gold Old-Fashioned AI, which is the one I know best and the one I like. Also, the project was to simulate intelligent behavior. But one of the questions is, are we going to simulate also the way humans think? Let's see first how they think. But if we do that, well, we are already doing that research. We don't know exactly, or not even approximately, how is that we think. So that project, I'm not saying is doomed to fail, but what we can do is, as a behaviorist, is to say, if we see the output and this program behaves as if it were intelligent, we call it intelligent. Great. Although we don't really know the human processes so well. But the other project, and my claim is in the second paper, sorry, you will see now this. The second paper that I gave you in the bibliography. Sorry, I had to say this first. It's called From Intelligence to Creativity, the Quest for Automated Creative Cognition. And this is in a volume that is actually in honor of Professor Lorenzo Magnani. And there, I don't have time to expand on this, but I want to tell you my claim. My claim is that nowadays, it's so difficult, even perhaps impossible, to know exactly how is that humans think, on the one hand. On the other hand, why is that we want to make artifacts that think like us? Already Paul told us, maybe there's artificial intelligence in the sense of, if I understood you well, it's another kind of intelligence. It's different. So we don't understand, just like the fish doesn't understand swimming. Well, we can say we don't understand thinking, and we less understand how is that these digital artifacts may think or may process, if you don't want to call it that way. So I think I got to the end, and thank you very much.
We have 17 minutes for questions. Please speak as loud as you can, or stand up and come to the front so everybody can hear you when you ask questions. And if there are online questions, I will raise my hand and read them.
Good. And also slow.
Yes, slow.
Because I don't know, I don't understand all accents. Thank you. Yeah. Comments, complaints?
Questions in it. explanations.
No. I want to get more questions. French, maybe a little bit, but English, please. Please.
You did elaborate a bit about imperative reason. You did mention it, and I wanted to know how basically you pronounce it pretty quickly that imperative reasoning is when we have conclusion that can be expanded on other processes. So it's a form of induction, so to say.
Absolutely.
How do you think this imperative reasoning is going to be used in AIs, or how can it be used in artificial intelligence? Do you think that it will be used in a, let's say, reasonable way, in logical way, or will it be instead used in an ironical way, a false logic, a false generalization?
Okay. First of all, I think there's no general answer for your question. I think it could be used either way. However, it is if we want to place where the judgment is, I want to place the judgment of the AI output to the human using the program. So let's put it this way. We all know Peirce talked about ampliative reasoning, also in the case of induction in the interpretation of enumerative induction. We can generalize after several, we don't say how many, but several instances. No, all cats are black if you are in a place where all the cats you have seen and are black. And this is done in empirical inquiries. Or quoting Popper, generalizations, inductive generalizations are true, are valid, until they are not. Meaning until you find a cat that is not black. But again, maybe the program, and Paul Thaker asks, what did you use to give me this generalization? And it might tell you, well, induction. Okay, that's wonderful. In fact, there's actually an area in machine learning, which is called inductive machine learning, and basically that's what they do. But computers don't live in the world. So this is a generalization made from the data it had, and again, it's going to be valid until it's proved otherwise. And in abduction is similar. Why similar? We in that case, we draw hypotheses. Why is this or that? Well, explanations can also change if the world changes. And who is the one who is going to judge if the world changes? The person living in the world. Next step, but you didn't ask that, is what will we do when computers live in the world? That's, I don't know. Thank you. Oh, please.
I'm building on both his question and your answer, which is judgment relies on knowledge, and how it seems to me that there is no self-correcting process in the AI systems to integrate what the person living in the world is. And I can go back to very complex situations in the Middle East, but they don't exist in AI. They're in the data, but they completely change your perspective of the reality in some contextual understanding of what certain situations are in the Middle East. I can put content on that to make it less vague if you want. But it goes back to Robert Fisk's analysis of the ISIS videos and how he said these are as elaborate as a Scorsese's film.
Yeah.
And they're not just random groups of rogue terrorists under ISIS. He lived in the Middle East. He's a Westerner, so he has credibility with Westerners. And he lived in the Middle East for 30 years. He's the only person that was able to interview Osama bin Laden. He's the only one. So put that into context. That knowledge, that background knowledge versus all the rest that we have. AI does not have access to that. It is not in the real world. And even if it is in the real world, it doesn't have access to that granularity of knowledge. So where does judgment come?
Okay, so I'm not going to answer where those judgments lie, but or ask you where the
Well, for me, it lies in the real world.
Okay.
And the granularity of
Yeah.
the human brain.
But still, you started saying judgment relies on knowledge. One thing that's very important, and I didn't go into this, but your question allows me to mention the field of belief revision. Actually, for Charles Peirce, abduction is it's a process of belief revision, meaning you see something that's surprising, you come up with an explanation, and then you corroborate that explanation. Remember, there's a testability criterion, and this takes us to the world. And if we corroborate that hypothesis, then we have to revise our knowledge. See, no longer will be surprising. That sounds incredible. However, we live in the world. Also, let's put it this way, artifacts live in the digital world. It depends, when we say knowledge, it depends whose database we are talking about. So basically, what you are saying, but the notion of judgment, and I want to finish with this, and that's why I say I couldn't answer your question. As Serge mentioned, I've been working in basically how to apply abductive reasoning into clinical reasoning. So what makes a doctor a good doctor? How is that these people, the good ones, integrate all the epidemiological knowledge, maybe AI knowledge, why not? And fit the individual medical history and also perhaps history in general of the person and come up with the diagnosis. And judgment, in fact, is, I will go back to Aristotle, as a colleague of mine tells me. Ari already said that. So in this case, Ari said that we are talking about phronesis. Phronesis is practical reasoning. And for practical reasoning, you have not only to use it a lot, but also to use it to have a good judgment. But still, and doctors have even conferences for this, there are errors of judgment, not of reasoning. Maybe you didn't consider all the options. You forgot that that person had some antecedent of cancer in her family. Well, that would change everything. But you are pointing to a more complicated problem. And the more complicated problem, in my opinion, is that what happens when we have several agents? And several agents have different pieces of information, different judgments. Okay. Another question or comment?
You said, you explained more fully that what you said, what you're meaning for a model, so an artificial intelligence model, is that it's based on its model itself, but also of the data it has to create its conclusion, and therefore its conclusion will also be, or to be predestined by the humans interpreting it. So, right. But in abduction, like you said, and as such as it was presented by Pierce, and how we see a supernatural event or something mystical, surprising that happens in front of us, and and such that this fact changing, we have to change ourselves in front of this phenomenon. In humans, this has always been, or most likely been, accidental. We explore the world, we have been exploring the world, and then we have discovered a new thing by serendipity, or we have discovered something new. But an artificial intelligence is designed to predict or to define such abduction. It does it well. We could say we fall onto that abduction. We are forcing the abduction onto the artificial intelligence to give us that abduction, to give us such surprising fact. But it is hard to imagine how an artificial intelligence, if it has to be based on, let's say, the principle of logic that we also been, and since us, which have been so much dependent on our experiences and our sense around the world, and this artificial intelligence which only has predefined data and predefined string, and has to try to, in all of this amalgamate, tries to put all little pieces together to make that surprising fact. Wouldn't that make something, let's say, a bit say out of the imaginary then?
I'm not sure I understood your comment. Let me phrase it. So you say for humans, this is okay, it works that way, but not for artificial artifacts.
It's not that it cannot work, but if we force artificial intelligence to processing these abductions, where we had to wait until we could face it, or we could sense that, oh, okay, this is surprising then. But we ask the intelligence, the artificial intelligence, okay, generate something that is surprising. There's a clear difference between the two. And there's also clear limitation, because although the artificial intelligence can get all the data that it can, all the data of the centers, it doesn't have perception, it doesn't have movement, it doesn't have genealogy, it doesn't have emotion. It is also limited by that on what we consider surprising.
Okay, there's an assumption in, well, let me tell you an antecedent first. There's an assumption in GoFi, Good Old-Fashioned AI, which is called the closed world assumption. What does that mean? That means that whatever you are going to operate on a program, in principle, you cannot change it. It's there. And this was used by the so-called then expert systems. An expert system was supposed to be, as its names suggest, a system that has perhaps all medical knowledge, at least of one specialization. Let's say oncological knowledge, right? And then you have, as a human, as a doctor, a particular clinical case, and you say, well, I have the data, please let me know if this person may have cancer. I use may because you have to do empirical studies to corroborate that. And the system is going to work, even if it works really well. Closed world assumption means it's closed. You have no more data there. However, still, there's a way to, let me put it this way, to surprise the program. If given the rules that it has, what you input, the fact, let's suppose that the clinical case is the fact to be explained, let's suppose that given your data, the expectation or the prediction of the system is anomalous, or the fact rather is anomalous with respect to that data. That's a way to be surprising. See? However, you have a point here for Peirce actually, and that's why I said at some point that his notion of logic is very, very broad. For Peirce, we are, let me put it this way, we are sort of attacked by surprising facts. His model of mind, he thought of two mental states. We have the state of doubt and the state of belief. He didn't spoke of knowledge, by the way. It was doubt or belief. So if you stock, and this can happen to a program, if you have a fact that you cannot account for, that you cannot explain, you can have this in logic programming. When you do logic programming and the program cannot answer you because it doesn't have enough information, it says no. No, that's actually incorrect. Or rather, no means I don't have the information to deduce what you are saying from the program. So abduction comes there and it says, well, the answer is no, but if we had this other hypothesis, or if we had this other information, then I could give an account of what you are. So it's true. People have an experiential phenomenon when we are surprised. And in fact, Peirce talked about the irritation of doubt. Doubt irritates you to the point that then you have to calm your irritation and then achieve a belief. But in this respect, I think we can have the analogous situation with programs. We don't have enough information, and this is the whole area of belief revision. So it's true they cannot get surprised, okay, but they can say, I cannot account for this fact. I don't know if I answered your question more or less. Thank you. And I think are there any questions in the cyber world?
Nothing else.
Okay, so maybe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.